The Senate chamber buzzed with tension that could slice through steel. Cameras lined the back wall, ready to capture what was already being called the clash of the year. Former FBI Director James Comey sat stiffly at the witness table, his polished demeanor barely concealing irritation. Across from him, Senator John Neely Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his trademark smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He looked every bit the Southern lawyer who'd been sharpening his tongue for this exact moment. "Mr. Comey," Kennedy began, his accent rolling thick as molasses, "I'd like to start with a simple question. When did the FBI decide it could play God with the truth?" The crowd murmured. Comey blinked, shifting in his seat. "Senator, I'm not sure what you mean by that," he said carefully, voice flat and diplomatic. Kennedy leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting its prey. "Oh, I think you do. You and your friends in the Bureau took it upon yourselves to decide what the American people could and couldn't know. You call that justice?" Comey's jaw tightened. "Senator, my record speaks for itself." Kennedy shot back, "Yeah, it does, and it reads like a bad novel with too many excuses and not enough truth." The crowd gasped, and even the C-SPAN cameras seemed to zoom closer, hungry for every syllable. Comey tried to retake control. "With respect, Senator, I upheld the law." Kennedy didn't flinch. "You upheld your version of it. Let me refresh your memory." He held up a folder, a thick one, labeled "Confidential." The flash of red tape was enough to turn heads. "Page 3, Kennedy said, tapping the folder. "Read it out loud." Comey hesitated. Kennedy's voice cut sharper. "You heard me, son. Page 3. The silence that followed was electric. The former FBI director opened the folder, his face paling as his eyes scanned the text. Kennedy's grin widened just slightly. "Truth's a funny thing, Mr. Comey," he said, voice low but lethal. "It always finds a way to crawl out of the dark, even if it has to drag a few folks with it." Comey's lips parted, but the words didn't come. The silence inside the Senate chamber stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. The camera lights burned hot, catching every flicker of discomfort on his face. Senator Kennedy didn't move, he just watched, calm and patient, like a man who already knew how the story would end. Finally, Comey cleared his throat. "Senator, with all due respect, that document is being mischaracterized," he said, his tone brittle. Kennedy tilted his head, his voice carrying a razor's edge of humor. "Son, I'm not askin you to characterize it. I'm askin you to read it. That's what folks do when they got nothin' to hide." The room rippled with low laughter. Even a few reporters smirked behind their laptops. Comey's fingers trembled slightly as he turned the page. Kennedy leaned closer, elbows on the desk. "Page 3, Mr. Comey. The part where your office decided what emails to archive and what to lose in the shuffle. Those your words or somebody else's?" Comey tried to gather his composure, but Kennedy wasn't giving him an inch. "You know, back where I'm from, when a man loses something important, we go out and find it. We don't hide behind paperwork and fancy language." "Senator, you're implying intent," Comey began. Kennedy cut him off, voice sharp as thunder. "I ain't implying anything, Director. I'm stating it. Y'all didn't lose those records. You buried them. There's a difference." The audience murmured, the tension now thick enough to choke on. Kennedy leaned back, folding his hands. "Truth's got a heartbeat, Mr. Comey. And it sounds like it's comin' from this folder right here." Comey opened his mouth to protest, but Kennedy raised a finger, stopping him cold. "Now don't rush," he said. "You've had years to think about it. Take your time. The truth ain't goin' nowhere." The crowd went silent again, waiting for the former FBI director to find words that would save him, but there were none that could. Comey adjusted his tie, trying to mask the tension radiating from every muscle. He finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "Senator, I acted within the boundaries of the law and in the best interest of national security." Kennedy chuckled softly, shaking his head. Well, bless your heart, Director, but that's not how the law works. You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you think you're the smartest man in the room. The chamber filled with murmurs. Kennedy's tone was steady but cutting, his words landing like hammer blows. See, the problem with Washington, he continued, is too many folks think patriotism means hiding the truth to protect themselves. Down in Louisiana, we call that cowardice dressed in a flag. Comey's composure cracked for the first time. That's unfair, he said, his tone rising. Kennedy smiled, a slow, deliberate grin. Unfair? You lectured this country about integrity while your bureau played hide-and-seek with the truth. If that's fairness, then I'm the Queen of England. Laughter broke out in the gallery, quiet, uneasy, but real. Comey's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening against the table. Kennedy flipped through the folder again, eyes scanning a few lines. Here it is, he said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. Internal memo, dated March 7th. Your signature. It says, some materials may be withheld for the preservation of institutional trust. Kennedy leaned forward. Now, I don't speak bureaucrat, Mr. Comey. But where I'm from, that sounds a whole lot like lying by omission. Care to explain? Comey stammered. Senator, context matters. Oh, I agree, Kennedy interrupted, his drawl deepening. Context matters. So does honesty. And right now, the context is that you're sittin' here trying to defend something that smells like swamp water. The air was electric. Kennedy let the silence linger before finishing, voice calm but lethal. Let me tell you something, Director. Truth don't need spin doctors or excuses. It just needs daylight. And I reckon you've had plenty of time to open the blinds. The weight of Kennedy's words lingered in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst. Cameras zoomed closer, capturing every twitch on Comey's face. The former FBI director swallowed hard, realizing that the senator's folksy tone wasn't just charm, it was precision weaponry. Senator, Comey began carefully, the Bureau's job isn't easy. We balance national security, privacy, and political pressure. Sometimes that means making hard calls that not everyone agrees with. Kennedy leaned back, folding his arms. Hard calls? Son, hard call is choosing between right and wrong when both cost you something. What you did wasn't hard, it was convenient. The audience murmured in approval, sensing blood in the water. Kennedy pressed on. You talk about balancing like you're carrying the 10 Commandments in one hand and a shovel in the other. Problem is, looks to me like you've been doing a lot more digging than praying. A reporter in the front row scribbled furiously, her eyes wide. Comey exhaled sharply. Senator, I'm not here to be insulted. Kennedy smiled thinly. Then maybe you shouldn't have come with something to hide. The room erupted in gasps. Even a few senators from Comey's side of the aisle exchanged uneasy glances. Kennedy's tone softened just slightly, the kind of shift that made his words land twice as hard. Look, Mr. Comey, I don't think you're the devil. But I do think somewhere along the way, you forgot who you work for. It ain't the White House. It ain't the Bureau. It's the American people. Comey's face hardened. I've served this country my entire life. Kennedy nodded slowly. And I believe that. But serving your country means telling the truth even when it burns your own house down. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kennedy leaned forward one last time. You had a chance to clean your own mess, Director. But you didn't. So now, this committee's gonna hand you the mop. The gavel cracked against the table, but the echo of Kennedy's words drowned everything else out. The gavel's echo faded, but the tension didn't. Comey sat motionless, his jaw tight, while Kennedy calmly rearranged his papers like a man wrapping up a sermon. The entire chamber was silent, no coughs, no whispers, just the hum of the cameras broadcasting every heartbeat of the confrontation to millions watching at home. "Director," Kennedy said, his drawl smooth as bourbon, "you keep tellin' us about protocols, procedures, and policies. But I keep hearin' excuses, not answers. You know what my granddaddy used to say? When a man starts talkin' in circles, it's 'cause he's tryin' to fence in the truth." Comey looked up, his face pale. "With respect, Senator, you're misinterpreting my statements." Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm understandin' you just fine. You're sayin' you can't remember, can't confirm, can't deny, and can't clarify. That's 4 ways of sayin' nothin' dressed up like somethin'. The audience reacted audibly now, some with gasps, others with muffled laughter. Kennedy tapped the file again. "This here says the Bureau decided certain information was, and I quote, too politically volatile to release before the election. Now, unless that phrase means something different in Washington, it sounds a whole lot like y'all picked sides." Comey's nostrils flared. "Senator, that's an outrageous accusation." Kennedy leaned in, voice dropping to a low, cutting tone. "What's outrageous is an unelected man playing referee in a democracy. The people decide elections, not bureaucrats with God complexes." The words hit like a thunderclap. Comey tried to retort, but Kennedy wasn't finished. "You want to talk about integrity? Integrity ain't a speech, son, it's what you do when nobody's watchin'. And from where I sit, it looks like when no one was watchin', you got real creative with the rulebook." Comey's hand twitched toward his microphone, but Kennedy raised a hand to stop him. "Don't worry, Director," he said with a thin smile. "We'll let the facts do the talkin'. I'm just here to make sure the American people finally get to listen." The room buzzed again, the balance of power shifting visibly. Kennedy wasn't just winning the exchange, he was rewriting the narrative. The walls of the chamber felt smaller now, pressing in with the weight of Kennedy's authority and Comey's unraveling composure. The senator leaned forward, clasping his hands together like a preacher about to deliver the final verse of a sermon. "Mr. Comey," he began, slow and deliberate, "you once said that leadership is about telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. So let's get uncomfortable together." Comey didn't respond. His eyes darted toward his notes, scanning for an escape route that didn't exist. Kennedy flipped open another page of the dossier in front of him. "Here we got communication logs, emails between your office and certain political operatives just weeks before major case decisions were made. Now, maybe it's just coincidence, maybe it's divine timing, but where I come from, we call that smokin' gun territory." Comey shifted, visibly unsettled. "Senator, those communications were procedural." Kennedy interrupted with a small, sharp laugh. "Procedural? That's a mighty fine word for coverin' your tracks." The gallery erupted with whispers. Kennedy's southern charm gave way to a razor edge as he continued, "You didn't just cross a line, Director. You drew a new one and dared the country to forget where the old one was." Comey's voice trembled slightly. "I followed the law, Senator." Kennedy's reply came quick, calm, and deadly, "No, sir. You followed your ego." The air cracked with tension. Kennedy tapped the table twice, punctuating his next words. "Now, I've read every page in this binder. I've seen the contradictions, the double talk, the carefully worded half-truths. And let me tell you something, you can paint a skunk white, but it still smells the same." A faint ripple of laughter broke out among the senators behind him. Comey's eyes narrowed, but Kennedy didn't give him time to recover. "You told the American people you served justice. What you served was politics on a silver platter, and you didn't even bother to wash the dishes afterward." Kennedy leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with quiet confidence. "Now, Director, before we go any further, I want you to think real hard about your next answer. Because the only thing more dangerous than a lie," he paused, letting his words hang in the air, "is a liar who thinks he can get away with it. The room was silent, every camera trained, every breath caught. Comey's reputation was no longer under scrutiny, it was on trial. Comey's hand trembled as he adjusted his microphone, but Kennedy's steady gaze pinned him like a hawk sighting its prey. The senator's voice dropped lower now, measured, almost gentle, but with a gravity that filled the room. "Mr. Comey, when you raised your hand and swore that oath, you didn't swear to a party. You swore to the truth. And somewhere between the briefings, the leaks, and the talk shows, you traded that oath for headlines." Comey's face hardened. "Senator, that's not true." Kennedy cut him off instantly. "Oh, it's true, Director. You just don't like the way it sounds comin' from somebody who ain't afraid to say it." The crowd stirred again. Kennedy opened a folder stamped confidential in red ink. "Now, let's talk about this internal memo your deputy sent you, dated October 12th. You remember this one? It reads, and I'm quoting here, media strategy must be coordinated to maintain narrative consistency." Kennedy held up the paper, letting the cameras capture it. "Now I'm no lawyer from Harvard, but even I know that ain't standard bureau language. Sounds to me like y'all were more interested in PR than justice." Comey's jaw clenched. "Those discussions were about transparency, Senator." Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "Transparency? Well, bless your heart. That's one way to spell damage control." Laughter rippled through the room again. Kennedy pressed forward. "Director, you once said sunlight is the best disinfectant. But I'm startin' to think you kept the blinds closed, 'cause you were afraid of what might crawl out." Comey opened his mouth to respond, but Kennedy's voice boomed over him, sharp and resolute. "You've built a career on the idea that you're the conscience of Washington. But real conscience don't need a camera crew or a book deal to tell the truth." Every eye in the room was on Kennedy now, his slow southern cadence giving each word weight. "The American people are tired, Director. Tired of men in suits tellin' them to trust the system while the system keeps changin' the rules." He leaned closer, his tone dropping to a cold whisper that the microphone still caught. "You don't restore trust by hidin' behind procedure. You do it by standin' up and sayin' the words you're too scared to say, 'I was wrong.'" The silence that followed was total, no scribbling, no whispers, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the quiet destruction of James Comey's credibility. Comey sat still, his eyes darting across the table as if searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. The camera zoomed in, his jaw tightened, his confidence dissolving with each passing second. Kennedy's voice sliced through the silence again, calm, unhurried, but sharp enough to leave a mark. "You know, Director," Kennedy said, his Louisiana drawl dripping with irony, "when I was a kid, my daddy used to say, if you can't tell the truth without rehearsin', you probably shouldn't be tellin' it. And lookin' at you right now, I can't help but think you've been practicin' this dance a long, long time." A ripple of quiet laughter filled the chamber. Comey's lips pressed into a thin line. "Senator, this entire line of questioning is political theater," he said, his voice brittle. Kennedy leaned forward, resting both elbows on the desk. "Theater? Well, Director, if this is a play, then you're the one who wrote the script, and the audience ain't buy-in the act anymore." The words hit like a hammer. Comey tried to maintain his composure, but Kennedy's cadence was relentless, each phrase cutting deeper. "You talk about justice like it's a brand you can trademark," Kennedy continued, tapping the folder with a deliberate rhythm. "But justice don't need PR, and it sure don't need spin doctors. It needs men with spines, and I don't see one sittin' across from me." Gasps rippled through the room. Comey inhaled sharply, his pride finally cracking. "Senator, I resent that insinuation." Kennedy didn't blink. "You can resent it all you want, son. Truth don't care about your feelings." He paused, letting the tension stretch until the silence itself became unbearable. "Here's the deal," Kennedy said softly, his voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. You've built a legacy outta actin' like the smartest man in every room. But sometimes, the smartest man's just the best liar. The gallery broke into stunned murmurs. Even the journalists who had arrived expecting routine politics were leaning forward in disbelief. Kennedy slowly closed the folder, the sound echoing like a final gavel strike. "I don't hate you, Director," he said, his tone now almost sorrowful. "But I do hate what you've done to the trust people used to have in this country's institutions. You took that trust, polished it up, and sold it for a book deal." Comey's face reddened. "That's an outrageous accusation." Kennedy nodded slightly. "So was everything you said under oath. Looks like we're even." The room was stunned into silence. Kennedy leaned back, calm as ever, while Comey sat frozen, his silence now the loudest confession in the chamber. The air inside the chamber felt electric, thick with the kind of silence that only comes when truth has finally cornered power. Kennedy adjusted his glasses, studying Comey like a man inspecting a puzzle he'd already solved. The senator's drawl softened, but his words carried a weight that landed like a verdict. "Director," Kennedy began, "you've said a lot today. Some of it polished, some rehearsed, and some, bless your heart, just plain nonsense. But the one thing you ain't said, the one word America's been waitin' to hear, is sorry." Comey stiffened, his voice tight. "Senator, I have nothing to apologize for." Kennedy smiled, slow and deliberate. "That right there, Mr. Comey, that's your problem. You think contrition's a weakness when it's really the only proof a man's got a conscience left." The senators behind him leaned forward, the tension drawing every ear closer. Kennedy opened one last document, his tone turning grave. "This here," he said, tapping the page, "is the summary of your internal audit, signed by you. It says your department failed to maintain impartial integrity in politically sensitive investigations. Now, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but where I come from, when a man signs his name to a failure, that means he owns it." Comey's jaw clenched, his voice cracking. "Those were procedural findings, not admissions of misconduct." Kennedy raised his eyebrows. "Procedural findings? Son, that's lawyer talk for we got caught, but we ain't confessin'. Laughter rippled through the gallery, though Kennedy didn't join in. He leaned closer instead, his tone turning to steel. "You know what I think, Director? I think you love the power more than the principle. And that's the first sin of every man who forgets who he works for." Comey's eyes flashed with anger. "Senator, you're twisting my record to fit your politics." Kennedy's voice stayed calm, eerily calm. "No, sir. I'm twistin' your words to fit your actions. They're the only things that match." The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras clicked like thunder. Kennedy straightened, collecting his notes. "You said earlier that sunlight is the best disinfectant," he said, his voice echoing across the marble walls. "Well, I reckon this hearing just opened every window in the house." Comey didn't answer. His silence was deafening, an unspoken admission wrapped in pride. Kennedy nodded once, then leaned into the mic with his final line. "And if you still think I'm wrong, Director, then bless your heart, because you're about to learn the hard way that daylight don't lie." The crowd gasped, reporters typing furiously as Kennedy's final words echoed through the chamber like a closing hymn. The hearing room was silent when Senator Kennedy leaned back in his chair, the faint creak of leather the only sound in the tense aftermath. Former Director Comey sat frozen, his once proud posture sagging under the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. Kennedy's expression didn't gloat, it was calm, methodical, like a man who didn't need to celebrate the truth, only reveal it. "Director," he said finally, his tone even, "I don't hate you. I don't even think you started out wrong. But somewhere between your ambition and your ego, you stopped workin' for justice and started workin' for yourself. And that's when good men start doing bad things." Comey's lips parted as if to respond, but Kennedy raised a hand gently, silencing him. "You don't need to explain it. America just heard enough to make up its own mind. The senator gathered his papers, each motion deliberate and unhurried. He paused, glancing at the rows of cameras, his drawl carrying both warmth and warning. What happened here today ain't about left or right. It's about truth. And if tellin' the truth burned somebody's house down, well, maybe it needed cleanin' anyway. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the chamber. Kennedy stood, buttoning his jacket with the slow precision of a man finishing his work. "We can't fix this country," he said, his voice steady, "by pretendin' our leaders never lie. But we sure as shootin' can start by holdin' 'em to it when they do." Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, and in that moment, Kennedy wasn't just a senator, he was the voice of every American tired of being talked down to by men who thought accountability was optional. As he turned to leave, Comey finally spoke, his tone faint and defeated. "Senator, history will judge us both." Kennedy stopped, turned slightly, and smiled without turning cold. "Maybe so," he said. "But at least I'll be standin' when it does." With that, he walked out, each step slow, resolute, echoing down the marble hall like the final word in a sermon that needed no amen. The cameras stayed fixed on the empty chair Comey left behind. For the first time in a long while, the truth hadn't whispered, it had thundered. "Folks, I didn't come here today to win an argument, I came here to remind people what accountability looks like. The truth doesn't belong to Washington, or the FBI, or any politician who thinks they're too big to answer for their actions. It belongs to the people, the same people who wake up every day, go to work, pay their taxes, and expect honesty from the folks they elected. Now, I know tellin' the truth in this town can make you enemies. That's fine. I didn't run for office to make friends, I ran to make sure the truth didn't have to whisper in the shadows anymore. When power starts to rot, it don't happen overnight. It starts with one lie, one little, we'll fix it later, one, the public doesn't need to know. Before long, the whole system smells like the swamp it was meant to drain. So, to every American watchin', don't you ever let anyone in a fancy suit convince you that transparency's optional. Don't let them sell you silence wrapped in patriotism. Demand the truth, even when it hurts, even when it shakes the ground. Because sunlight doesn't just reveal what's wrong, it helps us grow something better. And as long as I've got a microphone and a heartbeat, I'm gonna keep opening those blinds, one hearing at a time.